Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Gaybrick, President of Technology and Business at Stripe. Stripe builds financial infrastructure for the internet. And if you've ever purchased a product online, you've probably used Stripe. In this conversation, we'll talk about what Stripe's doing in crypto and stablecoins, how AI is changing commerce and payments, how they're thinking about going public, how they build products internally, and the interesting data they're seeing around AI native companies, like how they're growing 3.5 times faster than SaaS companies. A quick thank you to Claire Hughes Johnson and Josh Kushner for helping brainstorm topics for Will. A reminder, I publish episodes of The Peel every week. And check out the back catalog of over 100 episodes exploring the world's greatest startup stories just like this one. Let's talk to Will after a quick word from Numeral and Amplitude. This episode is brought to you by Numeral. Numeral is the fastest, easiest way to stay compliant with US sales tax and global VAT. It's easy to set up, and they automatically handle all registrations, ongoing filings, and their API provides sales tax rates wherever you need them with all the integrations you need. Numeral supports over 2,000 customers in both the US and globally, and they pride themselves on white glove, high-touch customer service. Plus, they guarantee their work, and they'll cover the difference if they mess anything up. They're fresh off a fundraise, closing a $35 million Series B from Mayfield, which they're going to reinvest into building an even better product. If you want to put your sales tax on autopilot, check out Numeral at their new domain, numeral.com. That's numeral.com for the end-to-end platform for sales tax and VAT compliance. This episode is also brought to you by Amplitude. You might know Amplitude for its product analytics and event tracking, but they recently launched AI Feedback. It automatically collects thousands of pieces of customer feedback across surveys, support tickets, sales calls, app reviews, places like Reddit, Discord, XG2, and more, all inside the product. This is more than just word clouds or sentiment scores. Amplitude itself found that better anomaly detection and alerting had been asked for by its customers 398 times. Replit is already using AI feedback to ship faster, and their head of product engineering called it magical after seeing it analyze all its customer feedback sources with just a few clicks. AI feedback is included in Amplitude's free tier, so whether you're a startup or large enterprise, head to amplitude.com/AI-feedback to start listening to your users. That's amplitude.com/AI-feedback. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So I think a good place to start, you have a very specific title at Stripe. Can you just explain what it is and what you do at Stripe?
Yeah. So President of Technology and Business, agree, pretty specific. We already have a president. That's John Collison. And so we've given me a somewhat more specific title to be more descriptive of what I actually oversee, which is technology and business. Broadly, that means I manage product engineering, so across all of our product development areas and infrastructure, security, things like that. And on the business side, teams like partnerships, risk, GTM operations, core company operations, support. And the sort of JD is deliver the business and deliver the roadmap. And that's what I'm focused on every day.
Make the chart go up.
Exactly. Charts.
Charts. Yeah, many charts. But it used to be, instead of technology, it was product.
Yes.
I think that was like a change a couple months ago. Well, what's the significance of the change? Like, did you do more product related things before?
Well, still spending just as much time on product, I guess, more hours per day on Stripe total, if that's even possible. But we decided that it would be more efficient if we brought some of the infrastructure teams closer to product teams. It wasn't like there was some sort of huge disconnect between how they were executing, but we're always looking for ways to create new efficiencies in how we run the company.
And is that like infrastructure related to product, like moving faster, like being able to bring the product closer to like the rails of financial services kind of a thing?
Well, there's sort of several layers of infrastructure at Stripe. There is cloud infrastructure and the services that product teams use to build products. There is sort of product infrastructure, like you said, rails, integrations with banks, integrations with payment networks, and so on. And Stripe's, one of our number one selling points and, top focus areas, will always be a top focus area, is reliability and security. And so infrastructure focuses basically on that and then accelerating product development.
How do you accelerate product development with better infrastructure?
So in so many ways, we spend a lot of time on developer productivity. So one of the sort of principles that we think about a lot at Stripe is what are the non-speculative, forever compounding investment areas? And I think developer productivity is one of those. Like you make your developers happier, more productive. That's just going to make you a better place for engineers to work every year and just make your engineers more effective. And so we are constantly thinking about new ways to empower developers. Built something cool recently called Minions, which is basically using large language models to automate a lot of the run load that's coming to our product teams. So you can actually sort of click a button in a Jira ticket and just a minion will go off and fix the thing or update the thing. You'll see the PR, click a button to approve. And that's actually getting a ton of use internally.
Is this something that you built internally or is like a external product that you use?
Built internally, yeah.
Interesting. So why'd you decide to build that internally versus, buy it from somewhere? Was there nothing like that on the market that existed or?
There's probably things like it. I can't think of any services off the top of my head that do exactly what it does. But in a lot of cases, build versus buy for us is dictated by just how strategic something is to, the long-term arc of the company and, creating value for users. And for developer productivity, we often find that our systems are so specific that sort of building on top of them is a lot more efficient than trying to bolt things on.
Interesting. So yeah, I think you kind of broke the internet maybe with the Bridge acquisition. I forget when this was. It was maybe a year ago, maybe 8 months ago.
Yeah, 10 months ago. Yeah.
10 months ago. So I was in the middle or right around it. So then how did you approach deciding that you should acquire versus start to build that internally?
Yeah. So I think with acquisitions, the adage that you don't acquire companies, you acquire founders and sort of founding teams has always rung true to me and to us at Stripe. We had highly convergent roadmaps. They were building things sort of right as far as we could assess. And we just thought Zach and Sean were extraordinary founders and we could go faster by working with them.
So then how do you convince such capable founders that they could probably do it without you, right? In theory, how'd you convince them to join?
It's sort of interesting. I think their calculus is very similar to ours. We can go faster with Stripe than going it alone. When we announced the acquisition, it was almost like, the gun at a starting line for the stablecoin industry. There was already a lot of TVL or a lot of stablecoins in circulation at the time. But in terms of the idea of bringing stablecoins mainstream, it was still just sort of an idea. And I think one of the things that, Zach and Sean would tell you is as soon as we announced the acquisition, the inbound was sort of, DDoSing their very small sales team and just creating that demand, seeing the new use cases has been really powerful in driving our roadmap, their roadmap. And I think also just a lot of the competencies that Stripe has, around navigating global regulatory landscape, working with banks, existing partnerships and things like that was attractive to them.
Yeah, because that's an interesting just component of crypto stablecoins as a whole. Is like you have to interact with the fiat system as much as you want to say we don't need it and like its own world, which it is. It's like its own economy. But also like the real world does exist and you've got to interact with it.
Totally.
So can you actually just real quick explain what stablecoins are for somebody who doesn't actually know? Yes. And also for my benefit, because I feel like you're probably 100 times more than I do. How would you explain to someone who doesn't know but is really smart?
Yeah, they are digital assets on chain that are backed by real world, like fiat assets, not real world, but fiat assets. Obviously, today, the most popular stablecoins are backed by USD. Typically, these are custodied at major financial institutions and they're US treasuries or other liquid instruments. What this basically means is that stablecoins allow you to start thinking about running your business on digital assets.
Why don't you just use like USD? Like, why do you need to use a stablecoin in the first place? Is it because the underlying currency in certain markets are just as volatile as Bitcoin?
It's actually not really about volatility so much as how money moves globally. So Stripe's mission is to grow the GDP of the internet. What that means tactically is that we're very often just trying to make money and financial services work the way that we all would expect them to. So you would think, oh, well, it's easy using just electricity and computers to move money all over the world. It really isn't, because just the global financial system is so fragmented. And so you are thinking about stitching together all these disparate rails. You're thinking about correspondent banking, and moving money is often very expensive. Wires cost dozens of dollars or very slow. And so we have always been extremely excited about crypto, less because of the opportunity to make a quick buck on trading across coins, and more about the underlying financial platform that allows you to move money globally via just one protocol that sort of all developers can sort of. It's like a Schelling point for developers. It's here we all just use Solana, or if we all use ETH and there's stablecoins sitting on top of both, then money can just move seamlessly.
How complicated is it under the surface running the sort of financial network that Stripe runs, like on a scale of 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000? What would be surprising about it to people that they just like, wow, that's a lot more complex than I would have realized?
Well, on Stripe, you can use a single API to get access to, on the order of 150 payment methods. If you were trying to integrate each of those individually, it would take many hundreds of person years, thousands of person years, maybe even more. And so finding a way to normalize the underlying components such that we can create that unified experience on the front end, that's pretty hard. And it's been something we've been investing in now for 14 years. One of the things that I've always found interesting is that a lot of times you'll find in the early days that users will say, hey, we would never do X. So we heard from a lot of enterprise users, we would never, give up the sort of core interface of our checkouts. That's too important. That's our IP. We have to own that experience, every pixel. Because we've been able to, via a single API, allow you to get access to these 150 payment methods, we now find that 72% of enterprise customers going live on Stripe sort of delegate the front end to us. It's all brandable. They can sort of express their brand, and it's all configurable. But there's just so much complexity behind these payment method integrations that they're sort of happy for us to take that load off of them.
Interesting. Okay. One maybe like slightly different question, but maybe sort of related, deciding that stablecoins was like worth going after. How do you at Stripe build conviction around knowing what to do? Maybe this is like Will personally, maybe this is Stripe like as a team. What goes into those decisions?
Users. You are on this infinite journey of discovering customer needs. And I'm sort of in awe of this because it truly has guided every epoch of Stripe. In the early days when Stripe launched, it was a single API to start accepting payments nearly instantly. And the state of the art back in the late 2000s was, you would have to work with banks or sort of legacy merchant acquirers. It would take days to get going. And so Patrick and John, years before I joined the company with the sort of founding team, sort of solved this problem by just saying, hey, how can we make this instant? Developers expect instantaneous self-serve experiences. How can we enable that? We then started to see the on-demand economy and the platform economy emerge.
So this was like Instacart, Uber.
Exactly. That's sort of on the on-demand side. And then on the platform economy, you had companies like Shopify or Squarespace, Wix, WooCommerce.
Which was like enabling mass long tail of new businesses that you probably Stripe wouldn't go in and like acquire the seller on Etsy that's like knitting some scarves and they make a couple $1,000s a year.
Yes. It's It's certainly not our core competency to go serve that user directly, but we can be the infrastructure backing the platforms that do that. And so, as we started to see that emerge, it gave rise to what we call Stripe Connect, which is infrastructure for multi-party money movement and allowing, platforms to embed payments, create their own payment solutions. Then in the late 2010s, you start to see the rise of fintech. Suddenly everyone wanted to build a consumer or merchant financial services platform. So we built products like Stripe Treasury, issuing to give them sort of the core building blocks to build their own financial services. Then most recently, you see this boom and customers looking for stablecoins and global money movement infrastructure. And then, of course, all the AI companies. And they have, very particular and interesting needs. One of those is just serving customers globally, because most AI companies are providing digital goods that can work across borders.
Which is probably unique compared to some of these other previous waves.
Exactly. Yeah. In most cases, making money work well in a single market is actually not that hard. But as soon as you cross borders, just everything gets a whole lot more complex.
Is it just like regulations, laws, like uniqueness, like everything's different kind of a thing?
Exactly. And money tends to move slower and you have to move, passes through several financial institutions. And by being a unified platform on money movement, we can speed it up. We can take the complexity off our users' plates and so on. But yeah, the median AI company among the top 100 on Stripe sells into 55 countries. But when you look at, companies like Lovable, which, is a vibe coding platform, actually the fastest company ever to $100 million in revenue on Stripe. It took them 6 months. It was pretty amazing. They sell into over 150 markets today. And, for them, they just want to create a seamless experience for their customers. Every payment method that customers want, in markets from Japan to Australia, to anywhere in Europe. And then for the long tail, this is where sort of AI and stablecoins come together. You have places like Vietnam or Argentina where, the preferred payment methods may actually be paying directly to stablecoins.
Do you think, do these people ultimately want US dollars probably? And like the stable coins is like the way that you go from Vietnamese dong or Argentinian peso?
Yes.
I hope I got that right.
Yeah.
Into being able to converge to USD, or US dollars. Like, is that ultimately kind of what stable coins get at?
Yeah, I'm guessing the sort of need behind the need is just a stable currency and one that they can use, with any counterparty because they will accept it. But what that amounts to typically is USD.
Because I have a lot of friends who, they're in like Brazil or, like what you maybe consider an emerging market, but they kind of have the institutional knowledge or they behave just like your friend in San Francisco or New York, but they're kind of like trapped in like, I earn my wages are in Nigerian naira or something. And like, the government is like deflating the currency or I guess inflating the currency 100% every year and I can't use it.
Yes.
So there's like that desire to get out.
Yeah.
What other interesting thing are you seeing in the data on all the AI stuff that's happening on Stripe?
So the companies are growing incredibly quickly. We look at that top 100. Again, the median company among top 100 AI companies on Stripe is reaching $10 million in revenue in 10 months. If you look at the top 100 SaaS companies on Stripe, the median reached 10 million in revenue in 3 years. So they're just monetizing faster.
So it's really like a little over 3 times as fast, 3.5 times as fast.
So just monetizing incredibly quickly.
Do you know what it is? Like, what are they monetizing faster? Is it because there's this like self-serve, easier to like get value quickly type of thing?
Yeah, listen, in many ways, just LLMs is almost like just this alien technology landing on Earth, being able to create experiences that you just never thought were possible. And we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs leveraging that to create new types of software and new types of products that we all find very, very useful. It's interesting because these companies have a bunch of new needs.
Like, what are you seeing specifically?
So inference is expensive, and so with SaaS, you could have just subscription-based pricing models, super high margins.
And it's pretty simple too. Just right. Me and Will are both going to sign up like 2 seats. It's $20 a month or whatever.
Exactly. Whereas the most popular business model we're finding for this new cohort of AI companies is this hybrid business model where you have a SaaS subscription. Say you're buying $100 a month of, whatever service, Lovable, Cursor, so on. And then that SaaS subscription gives you an entitlement to a certain amount of usage. You burn down that entitlement. In many cases, you go over it. And so you need to think about how you calculate overages. And so it's this hybrid subscription and usage model. And then you think about adding new products and how that sort of factors into your existing entitlements and your existing subscriptions. And so the combinatorics of like commerce complexity here is really interesting. So what we're seeing and what we're focused on building is, maybe give a bit of background. Stripe billing is one of our major product areas. Over half of startups going live on Stripe use Stripe billing, and Stripe billing is sort of a layer on top of the core payments infrastructure used to orchestrate payments, to model your business.
So this is like if you have fixed or like any kind of like customer relationship, it's like how you know what to charge them, essentially.
Exactly. Subscriptions, invoicing, how you model your product catalog, how you assess taxes, how you do revenue recognition, all of that. And this has always been an impediment to just customer growth. Like one of the adages we have internally is that every company has a billing system, and very few companies are enthusiastic about their billing systems. So with billing, we're really focused on changing that.
So they historically use like a different billing system than Stripe? Like, was it like Google Sheets usually, or
the real competitor is the in-house build?
Okay.
Basically, everyone ends up building this whole Borg of infrastructure. Stripe itself has this whole Borg of infrastructure, a big team on it. We are actually migrating onto billing ourselves, service by service by service.
Yeah, that's very meta. Like billing, the billing infrastructure for the billing infrastructure company.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's interesting. You can see the billing revenue for Stripe billing in the Stripe dashboard using billing. But you really do see with these AI companies the complexity of their business models, because this usage subscriptions hybrid is slowing them down. So Browserbase on Stripe uses billing and usage-based billing. And by experimenting with things like free trials and discounts, they were actually able to increase their growth by about 17% in relatively short order. And it's just giving you that business model agility is something that these AI companies are looking for. Another sort of related point on the note of free trials is you're seeing new fraud vectors.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Because you obviously want to enable your customers to go live quickly, but there is a cost. Unlike SaaS, there's a cost to people using your product and then disappearing. And so, we have Stripe Radar, which has always been focused on mitigating fraud at the time of transaction. Now we're looking up funnel with users and saying, hey, is this customer coming to you before they even process a payment? Are they fraudulent? Are they likely to convert to a paying customer? Things like that.
Are there any common, things that is currently capturing now, like common AI scams, I guess we could say, or like most common that you've seen of like ways people are, making a quick buck?
We see sort of fraud rings where fraudsters are creating a ton of free trial accounts and then selling them. So it's sort of, here's an account with this service. It gives you this much usage, and we're packaging these all up. And here now you can, test a bunch of your AI workloads on
interesting.
Shadeform or Cerebras or any of these types of companies. Not speaking about any of them in particular, but that type of business model where you're hosting models. I think we're seeing, a lot of fraudsters sort of basically aggregating usage models and then selling it.
Interesting. So that would basically be, if you were to go and sign up, you hit the limit and you have to start paying. But we could go and say, oh, wait a second, this person has 100 or 1,000 extra additional free trials that we can just tap into.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you can see how they would lose a lot of money on that pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah. The four major areas we're focused on in AI at Stripe are, one, building the economic infrastructure for AI. So this is everything we're just talking about. The commercial infrastructure to implement AI business models, these hybrid models, subscriptions and usage. Two is the infrastructure to enable agentic commerce. I think everyone is really excited about this.
Yeah, you guys just did something. What's the thing that you just kind of announced?
So a couple weeks back, we announced that we were partnering with OpenAI on ChatGPT Instant Checkout, which for anyone who hasn't used it, it is a great experience.
I should have actually tried to use. I have not used it yet. I should have before we did this. But
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. It's incidentally, the day before we announced it, I was on Etsy buying a new dog collar for my dog. And the next day, the demo was shopping in Etsy in ChatGPT.
Okay.
And they're both great experiences, but I was just struck by how I really do think this modality of the iterative shopping within a model is going to work. There's a lot of hubbub and promise to social commerce. And, it's had some mixed success. I think TikTok is having some good success there. But I really do think chat-based commerce in mediated by LLMs is going to be powerful. So we announced Instant Checkout ChatGPT. And the other thing we announced is what we call the Agentic Commerce Protocol, which is a relatively thin protocol, but just a way of standardizing how agents should interact with checkouts. So checkouts have a lot of logic built into them. Which payment methods can you use? What discounts are there? How are shipping rates calculated based on basket size? Is this fraudulent or not? And so we had done a lot of experimentation with pure browser-based automation. And we found that the technology just sort of isn't there yet. And we thought the world would really benefit from an open protocol. So it's not just a Stripe thing, but an open protocol to just enable the ecosystem to grow a whole lot faster.
Is this the shared payment token? Is that another word for it? Or
yeah, that's how it's implemented on Stripe.
Okay.
And yeah, basically a shared payment token is a way of securely passing credentials between the point of purchase.
So this would be Etsy or?
Exactly. So passing it from the point of purchase, which is say ChatGPT, to Etsy. And, the point is that you don't actually have to expose the underlying credentials to the merchant.
Okay. And this is, and I know there was a specific reason that you did that, which I feel like I should know.
I think in a lot of cases when we're designing these things, we're thinking not only just how do we very proximately solve a problem for just this use case, but also over time, what's good for the world. And we felt like the idea of agents just slinging underlying payment credentials to every merchant on the internet didn't,
could be dangerous.
Yeah, it didn't really pass like security and privacy muster. And so that's why we designed it to allow for this secure processing where you can collect the credentials in the chat interface and then use them to process without having to vault them with all merchants.
So like does Stripe doesn't actually like own the payment then with the underlying merchant, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, we don't, against open protocol, you don't have to build Agentic Commerce Protocol on top of Stripe. We don't have to process the payment. You can use Stripe for it, and we make it very turnkey and seamless. But we were pretty inspired by MCP, Model Context Protocol, that Anthropic released, I guess it was last year, from the standpoint of it being a very simple protocol, something that everyone could get behind, and again, create sort of this Schelling point for how we're all going to work together on what we think is a very big opportunity across the industry.
And that's sort of how you think about product at Stripe too, is like very modular. Like you don't, to your point, you don't have to use billing. Yes. You probably don't have to use Stripe issuing. You could use something else if you want. Why do you do that? Why doesn't, if I'm a company, come to Stripe, I'm a startup, like give me everything Stripe. Like why is it so important to be modular?
So I'd say this is a big inflection point in our thinking about how we develop products at Stripe. there was a time at which we sort of thought, hey, it's going to be the best experience if we are relatively closed and Apple-like and just everything will be tightly stitched together. And then we just learned from our users, so that's not what they wanted. I remember a conversation I had with, one of the largest retailers in Europe when I was in Paris. And they were looking for help in decreasing the size of their payments team because they had a couple hundred people on it.
On a retailer in France.
Yes. And they were...
That's like a Stripe at a Series D stage, right? Like a couple hundred people.
And just on, exactly. And just on their payments.
Yeah, just on the payments team. Yeah. They have like a whole Stripe internally.
Exactly. And actually we've seen this, I think this was what people would build. And one of the things we try to do is say, hey, listen, we can take a lot of that off your plate.
Yep.
And I remember them saying, we would love help decreasing the footprint, the number of payments processors we work with, and some help in sort of, orchestrating across them. And so I asked them, well, how many processors do you work with? And I expected them to say something like 6. They said 83.
Okay. So who are 83 payment processors?
So you have, a bunch of big names. I didn't ask them for all of the names. We have a bunch of big names who are offering sort of card processing across the world. And then you have a bunch of local players because they're selling all over the world. And so they're integrating to sort of local processors in Indonesia or the Philippines or Malaysia. And so navigating the logic across all of these is just a huge workload for them.
Yeah.
And so for us, we could either sort of ignore that and say, hey, what you really want is just to run everything on Stripe. I think they would just say no, or you'd say, interesting. We really think we can help with that. And so we've been leaning into how do we help you orchestrate your commerce infrastructure. Like you said, you don't have to use Stripe payments with billing. You can use billing to run subscriptions, send invoices, and then process them with a third party. And I think we've just learned, particularly as we go up market and work with more enterprises, now more than half of the Fortune 100 uses Stripe, that users want to be met where their systems are today. And that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, and they probably have different pace of adoption of different things. Like there might be some companies that are like, for the first time, we are accepting payment online.
Yes.
And they are not ready for everything else that you can do.
Yeah, it's interesting because the S&P 500, like the average tenure is like 15, 20 years. And so you could say, well, 10 years hence is, are all these people just sort of processing only on Stripe, or many of them processing only on Stripe? It's possible, but we also do see companies growing up on Stripe needing to add, other payment processors because our coverage in a given, geography isn't good enough yet, or they have a board mandate for redundancy. We see that sometimes that latter one has been sort of waning. Last year we had 99.9996% of requests on our critical APIs succeeding. It's actually less than 1 minute of downtime for the entire year.
I was going to ask you how much time that was. Yeah,
and this is pretty interesting because
was it all at once or was it like seconds spread out?
Yeah, it's actually not like hard down for the API overall. It's just looking at like individual failed requests and then sort of imputing a time from that. But the fascinating side on the other side is we're actually also deploying about 1,400 times a day. So you're actually pushing to production like roughly every minute, and you're down for less than a minute the whole year. And this has been, just a concerted investment in reliability over the years.
What are you updating 1,400 times a day? That's right.
Yeah.
Like what's changing?
Any number of services, and a lot of them are internal services. A lot of them are bug fixes. And then, of course, some of them are bigger pushes.
So this might be an interesting time when you're talking about like updating bugs, fixing things, pushing so many times. Are you guys using AI internally at Stripe? Like to what extent are you using it?
Yeah, we're using it a lot. And we're using it in targeted ways where we are really focused on getting real value out of it. There's the Jim Collins good to great framework of, I think it's crawl, walk, run in terms of adopting new technologies. And I guess his framework is the best companies are first discovering how this can really advance how they operate and create value for the customers. Then they start to scale that and they sort of, go all in. There was the HBR paper recently around work slop. I don't know if you saw that. It was in September.
I don't think I did. What was it?
Yeah, it's a study that asserted that 95% of companies are actually getting negative ROI on using AI internally.
I saw that headline.
That headline, exactly.
That was like the bear. Like, it's always funny. There's like these like ebbs and flows of like, it's over. Like, AI's done. It was all a scam.
Yes. That's certainly not what we believe. But we really don't want that to be the case, right? So we're not just sort of like, hey, everybody, you have to use an LLM now for everything. And so we have found, some very powerful targeted use cases. So I mentioned minions before, but also just writing code in general. And particularly for our most senior engineers, giving them leverage to go faster, because they're often thinking a lot about architecture and, keeping them from needing to write every line of code, instead putting them in a position where they're sort of, we think about new grads and one level up as doing a lot of the actual code writing at Stripe. There's like empirically, they do write the most lines of code at Stripe. And now senior engineers almost have a dedicated team of, level 1s and level 2s at Stripe because of LLMs, which can assist them in actually code creation. And then they're almost in a position of code review of the code that they've created themselves via an LLM. So, depending on how you measure it, you could say, more than 50% of code at Stripe is written by LLMs.
Interesting.
Or you could, say it's less.
What's the highest you've seen? Didn't Salesforce say like 75 or 90%? What was his number?
Yeah, I'm always, I think Google recently quoted, or maybe it was Amazon, 70%. I'm always interested into how people like count this, because we do, again, a lot of bug fixes and easy deploys via, tools like minions internally. And then we do a lot of code writing that's edited by people internally. And so it's like, did we write that code? It was more of a collaboration.
Yeah. Because a lot of times you just think it's like AI agents just running wild, like add a new field to Salesforce or like whatever. And that's the kind of, I feel like when some of the CEOs go on, like they'll do a CNBC clip and like, that's kind of what they make it think. They're what they make the audience think is happening. But it's still, there's very much humans that are involved in this. Like,
yes, very much humans involved. There's sort of a dynamic where LLMs are doing a ton of work supervised by humans. So a good example would be actually risk mitigation. So not just anyone can process payments on Stripe. You need to be a bona fide business. There's certain categories of business that are prohibited or deemed highly risky. Those need some stepped up review with partners, financial institutions, and banks. And, so there's a very long, document that if you are a human risk reviewer at Stripe, you need to deeply understand around whether or not a business is supportable for given use cases. LLMs are incredibly good at ingesting rules and then applying them. So we have seen incredible returns on assessing supportability on Stripe, both in accuracy and in efficiency, by saying, hey, model, take a look at this website, take a look at all their product pages, take a look at everything that's said about them on the internet, and let us know like how confident you are that this business is supportable. And if things are flagged, then humans get involved and can sort of provide that last 10% oversight that can sort of be dispositive. So that's been incredibly powerful. The other application that we're really excited about is augmenting our sales development team, our SDR team. Just, the early signs are that outbounding, which is sort of a new motion for Stripe, like so much of our go-to-market motion has been driven by inbound, but outbounding is going to become not just more efficient, but also more effective when we let LLMs go deeply understand a business on the internet and then craft a message about how Stripe might be useful to that business. And then, SDRs get involved to edit that, send it, and then sort of track the lead from there.
So when you say that might be interesting, are you indicating that like it's not quite there yet? Because I think everyone listening to this gets those like really bad AI generated sales emails.
Yeah, we're actually seeing so far that they are getting higher response rates.
Really? Okay. Is there anything specific that the higher response rates get Like, are they shorter emails? Do they like use numbers? Do they have misspellings? Like, do you know?
I don't know offhand. I was actually reading some of these last week.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. What seems to be like the general vibe of like these good AI emails?
They seem very personalized. So they seem like I really deeply understand what you're doing. And again, I think this is because they've been able to go, leverage the base model that OpenAI or Anthropic or other has created that has sort of compressed the internet, and so they can, take that compression, go look at a website, and come back with a lot of really interesting facts about that company that would take a long time for just a human to aggregate.
Yeah, it might be interesting in non-tech related or even like non-email denominated jobs.
Yeah.
So like if you run a manufacturing firm or something and you get AI generated really good email about some like manufacturing related software or something. Maybe this is a terrible example because maybe they get a ton of emails. Yeah. But when I think of like mine as like a VC, I'm constantly getting emails and like a lot of them are AI generated. Right. So I wonder if there's like in those like less email denominated industries or something where there's like, or even like, actually I think this might be illegal, but like texting, I actually don't think you can text people. Like there's a lot of rules on that.
Yeah.
But even, I don't know. LinkedIn, I think there's a lot of like LinkedIn automation that people do.
Yeah, I've anecdotally seen a lot more inbound texts. So illegal or not, it seems to be happening.
I get a lot from like loan companies. I think it's because like if you have a credit card balance, you like show up on a list and they're like, you qualify for our personal loan, like $63,000, like consolidate your debt. Yeah. Like, I'm not interested. Yeah. Stop calling me 8 times a day.
Yeah. I get a lot of the fixed term employment offers.
Oh, that'd be nice. Yeah. Like, hey, we heard you're looking for a job. Here's
Exactly.
Do you ever get those like, they're like, I get a lot from like Indeed recruiters. Like we found your resume on Indeed or LinkedIn. And like, I'm, Patricia from, Geico or something. Yes. And like, we're hiring remote workers.
Yes.
I've actually heard that there's some shady stuff that goes on with that. Like they pitch you as like, you're running payroll for a company, but you're actually like almost like a drug money mule in a way, where like you're facilitating those funds. It's actually like a pretty common tactic that a lot of people use for that, which is, does that show up on Stripe at all?
Not that I know of offhand, but broadly, some of the best advice that I ever received, and I think just we as a company have ever received, came from Robin Vince, who is he's the CEO of BNY Mellon. At the time, he was the CRO. Maybe this actually was back when he was the treasurer at Goldman Sachs. And I had recently joined Stripe. I joined as a CFO. And I asked him, among other things about being a CFO, like, what is the single most important thing that you think Stripe needs to get right? And this is way back in like 2016. And he said, you all will need to become conspicuously good at risk management. And it always stuck out to me as, plausibly the case, but I wasn't so sure why.
Yeah, because you probably think we need to build a beautiful product.
Exactly.
Like that's the most important thing.
Exactly. And, I think now Stripe is processing, a lot more than...
what's the last public number?
Actually, I guess the last public number is 1.3 trillion and 1.4 trillion of payment volume per year. So, you're between 1 and 2% of global GDP. And so at this scale, you're becoming an actor that is sort of systemically large.
Yeah. Someone takes you down, 2% of the economy doesn't run.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that, the investment in reliability is so critical. Investment security is so critical. And also you become, a huge target for not just fraud risk, but you mentioned a second ago, sort of scams or transaction laundering. You'll see a lot of times on Stripe what looks like a very bona fide merchant. Here's the domain, and you can actually place purchases, real looking products, and it is in fact sort of a mule for you to buy guns on a different website.
Oh, interesting.
So you go to the other website, you see what the gun costs, you buy a product that costs the same amount on here.
Like you're buying a makeup kit or something like completely unrelated.
Exactly. But this is actually where AI is, again, extremely powerful. We've always had a bunch of ML models in production at Stripe, about 150 models in production at Stripe. And some of these are DNNs, like deep neural nets. Some of the more sophisticated ones are But we launched mid-year this year, the first ever payments foundation model. And basically what the payments foundation model is these giant vectorized embeddings where you take just a ton of Stripe data, you tokenize it, you throw it against the transformers, and you then end up with this clustering. It's encoder only model. So you're not actually saying that we're then going to sort of decode it and sort of make a lot of extrapolations about exactly what the data means. But we're able to see the clustering of different merchants, and these transaction laundering merchants just show up together in the sort of giant embedding space. And so it's been fascinating to see. I think one of the great discoveries or revelations the past few years in AI has been that you take less opinionated model architecture, a ton of compute, a ton of data, and that tends to work better than sort of the really minute architectural thinking around models. Now, that's sort of only partially true because there's still a lot around model architecture that has been the unlocks, things like inference time compute. But what we've seen is that we had a lot of hand-curated features in our models in the past. And by just creating a really big model with all of our data, we're able to mitigate risk a whole lot better than we were able to, by sort of using our intuition about how you would discover these companies.
And it's just because you keep getting a bigger data set or more tests, and then that it solves itself? Like, is that how it works?
Yeah, it's sort of the magic of DNNs. They discover their own features. And so the features that you may intuitively think will lead you to whether or not a customer is laundering firearms transactions through what looks like a kids' toys website may not be the most telling features, and a giant foundation model can discover those.
Interesting. So do you use, you said you don't really use it necessarily, but you like made it to like see things. Is that a fair way to describe it?
We do use it. Yeah,
You do use it. Okay.
Yeah. And primarily for risk mitigation. Yeah.
Okay.
So card testing, again, like card testers show up, as a cluster. Transaction launderers show up as a cluster.
What's a card tester? Is that like you're testing to see if the card will work if you want to like just run a bunch of money through it?
You've stolen a ton of cards or other payment credentials. You want to resell them. You need to know which ones like you can are actually usable. Maybe you want to use them yourself.
Yeah, I think the surprising thing, I had a guest probably about a year or two ago. Her name was Natasha. The company is called Cable. They help just financial institutions fight crime, basically financial crime. And it's like a couple percentage points of GDP is just like people doing crime, which is like fraud, drugs, other even more horrible things. So it's pretty interesting just like how big that world is. It's kind of scary.
Yeah. One of the pillars of our company strategy for the past 3 years running is to become guardians of the global financial ecosystem. And that has meant, by turns, getting even better at mitigating risk on Stripe while creating, a surprisingly great user experience. And on the back end, how do we create tools and platforms that we can actually sell to other financial institutions or to our users to mitigate risk on their side?
I think you were pretty involved in this product that's it's connected to ChatGPT right now and how you do payments. It's called Link.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what's like the story with Link? Like, what is it? And it's like, what's the scale of it now at this point?
It's our only sort of consumer product, and it's effectively a very thin layer that we created to increase conversion and broadly improve online payments. It now has over 200 million consumers in the network. It's growing very, very quickly. And it was predicated upon the belief, and now I think sort of confirmed belief, that we could create better payments experiences by having the ability to set this little cookie with consumers and have a thin relationship with them than we could otherwise. So for example, our customers have, for Stripe's entire existence, wanted bank account driven payments.
So ACH, you mean?
ACH, SEPA in Europe, BACS, BEX in other parts of the world, in Australia, New Zealand, and so on. Or BACS, I guess, in the UK, and then BEX in Australia, New Zealand. And the problem is bank account payments are they don't have a lot of the sort of magic of credit card payments. I think the schemes, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, have built some really powerful infrastructure. They have kind of root access to program the money in your bank account. They can say, hey, you just bought this coffee. I'm going to hold $5 or in New York, $8, whatever, in your bank account. And I'm going to then settle it to the merchant at the right time. You don't have that with ACH. So you actually see that something like 4% of transactions fail 5 days after the transaction happened. And so we built Link for many reasons, but one of them was, hey, how can we actually make a bank account payment method that works the way you want it to? So one of the things that customers want is instant confirmation that they'll get the cash. So they don't want to wait 5 days to know whether or not it went through.
There's a merchant that is using Stripe.
Exactly. So, if you actually can go into Uber and you can see this supported right in the Uber app. Uber, wants to know at the time of booking the ride, is this payment going to go through or not? So if you use instant bank payments on Link, you get instant confirmation that it's going to go through. And so there's a whole lot of things we have to do to enable that. But, one of the biggest ones is just the underlying ML model to say, well, we know all of this about you and your transaction history, and you've linked your bank account to Stripe. And so we can, automatically confirm that payment. There's also sort of, just the pure convenience of Link, where you're showing up at a new merchant and you can pack in, your 16 digits and your zip code and everything else, or you can just get a quick OTP on your phone to say, I'm at a new AI service. I say that because Link is overwhelmingly popular with AI services. And I would rather not have to go through the whole checkout flow again. I just want to, get started quickly.
Yeah. And you started pretty quickly, right? Like it was just kind of this initially just I think it was like the Remember Me feature, like you click a button or something like that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Did you not expect it to just keep growing? Like what's the story there?
So we technically launched Link, it wasn't called Link, back in I think 2014. And it was a ability to remember your payment credentials on what was then called Stripe Checkout. And then when we launched the new version of Stripe Checkout, which was in 2018, it didn't have Remember Me built into it.
Oh, you removed it?
Yeah, but we removed it.
Oh, okay.
And there were millions of consumers that were using Remember Me, but it didn't have a name. There was no sort of identified consumer thing. It was just a feature on Stripe. And then we woke up one day, we're like, why did we get rid of that? Like that was really useful to merchants. And so Link was the sort of reincarnation of Remember Me, started only a few years ago. And as I mentioned, now over 200 million consumers and
nice,
and becoming a big deal. And we actually see that for a lot of merchants, particularly the new cohort of merchants joining Stripe, it's 50-60% of their transactions are Link transactions.
Oh, interesting. Is there a benefit to them where it's like speed, cost, anything like that? Or is it just like higher conversion because people are saved?
That's the principal one, higher conversion. Customer experience, just consumers love Link. It's a very subtle experience today. So actual brand awareness is relatively low. We're going to be changing that in the near future. But, you'll see, just go through Twitter, you see people say, I love it when I see Link.
Yeah, it's really slick. My favorite Link story personally is when I first signed up, I put the wrong phone number in. Like I think I put like a 6 instead of a 9 at the end of my phone number. And so it didn't work for me for a while. And anytime a checkout had Link, I couldn't use it because I couldn't change my phone number in the thing, which I think you guys have since updated and I can use it again. But I just remember thinking it's the only time I ever put my phone number in wrong.
Yes.
I couldn't use the product.
Yeah, it definitely was a launch and iterate quickly experience on the consumer side. So thank you for bearing with us. But, it goes beyond cards and bank account payments. We're always thinking at Stripe about, obviously our users, and they are the primary focus for Stripe, but also just other constituents in the payments ecosystem. And so we've partnered with Klarna recently to create, what I believe is the best BNPL purchasing experience on the internet, which is sort of Link x Klarna. They serve a bunch of custom APIs for us. And if you use buy now, pay later services, you'll find that they're incredibly powerful for increasing conversion in some ways, but they're also very frictionful. Like you actually have to get bounced out to Klarna Affirm or otherwise, put in a bunch of information, wait for a spinner for a while to say whether or not you're eligible to make the purchase. we do all of that underwriting in the background in Link. So that by the time you actually get to Link checkout, if Klarna appears, it's just one click to check out.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that. Because you always see those, like, you've probably seen the memes. You remember back probably like, it's probably 2021. There would be like literally 10 options of like, there'd be like a Stripe type checkout button, and there would be like Amazon Pay. There'd be like Shopify Pay, Fast. There's like a couple of these startups that were doing one-click checkout, and then Klarna. There's like 4 BNPL options. Is that? I don't think I have to, like, it's just a funny observation of like, but I feel like we've moved past that, right? Like, is there like consolidation in sort of that like checkout button space?
I don't know that we're in a sort of, I mean, there's been some consolidation, Cash App bought Afterpay, but there hasn't been a whole lot of consolidation. And this is actually one of the areas that we really focus on for customers, is when one of your shoppers hits the checkout page. Like for that particular shopper, which payment method should you show?
Oh, yes. You like source the certain one higher.
Exactly. Yeah. And we see this drives conversion a lot.
So one question, there's probably people who have been listening to this. I don't know, we're like an hour in. There's probably like people that are like kicking me like, dude, you got to ask them this question. Why haven't you asked this yet? Stripe going public. I know people always comment on it. Anything to say?
Not a ton to say. I think maybe the sort of incumbent perspective is, why aren't you going public?
Yeah. Or why are you staying private?
Yeah. And I think the way that John, Patrick, and Stefan, our CFO, and I think about this is, why are you going public? It's a bunch of work. There's a whole different way of operating. We already operate with the controls, the rigor, the time to close of a public company. And so it's like, what's the incremental benefit of going public? When I joined as CFO a long time ago, we had this principle of, we always wanted to operate cash flow positive. And to this day, we have actually never burned $1 of investor money. There were a couple of years in the early 2020s where we burned cash, but we didn't burn sort of below the amount that we had accrued on our balance sheet. So just, Stripe has always been sort of financially independent in that sense. Stripe is now extremely profitable. And so there's a question of what is the reason to go public?
Yeah. It seems like a lot of people, like, you need to give retail investors the ability to participate.
Yeah.
Like, that's a common reason that people give.
Yeah. And I guess that's sort of a belief in like creating like equity between institutional investors and retail investors. Maybe that's, I'm not sure that is the thing that should guide our decision making here so much as
there's billions of people that need Stripe equity in their retirement portfolios.
Yeah. I would say, being a mission driven company, it is, how do we grow the GDP of the internet as quickly as possible? How do we stay just resolutely focused on our users? We're already a highly regulated global financial institution. And so, the day comes where we say, hey, there really is a good reason to do this. And I suspect we will.
Yeah, I feel like some of the benefits of being public is like your stock is more liquid. So in theory, there's you have like a lower cost of capital. But then you can argue it like on a company per company basis, like how much of a benefit does a specific company get from sliding into that? Like you may not get much of a benefit.
Yeah.
I think another interesting thing when I think about this is just like the incentives of your investors. So if you're managing like a public market assets or funds, and you think about like, how do you make money? You charge management fees and you get carry, and you get paid carry quarterly if it's public. You get paid on the exit if it's private. But typically, there's been a lot of fee compression in public markets. So if like you're managing public market money, you might be getting like 1.5% management fee, maybe less. You may be charging on average like 15% carry versus in the private markets, 2% management fee. Some people do like 2.5% or 3%. And then also you get the carry, the percentage is also higher. So there's a certain element of like certain investors are like, I think it should perpetually continue to shift from public to private, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's clearly a blurring between public and private investors at this stage.
Yeah. Like I think in John's podcast, Cheeky Pint with Dan and D1, he's like a public market investor, but I think he said like 70% of their AUM is private. I may be getting this number wrong, but I think I remember him saying that more was actually on the private side, more AUM.
Yes.
Which you wouldn't have thought about that.
Yeah. I think the principal reasons, why companies go public, besides just inertia and the idea that you're supposed to do it, are one, access to capital. Stripe has issued bonds, investment grade company, highly cash flowing. Just that's not an acute need today. Creating employee liquidity. We've been able to run tender offers. We can't promise to always run those, but we've returned many billions of dollars to investors, to employees, and so on. And then the third is, maybe something around marketing and branding, where, by being public, you're sort of more trusted or seen as more enterprise grade. That may sort of linger around in certain corners, but I think we've mostly crossed that transom. Half of the Fortune 100 using Stripe. Stripe being, one of the major processors for companies like Amazon. Stripe moving, $1.3 trillion in money per year. So just none of those three really seem to be pushing us down the IPO river.
I think there's another element too of early people with illiquid stock want liquidity. And so if you just kind of go public, it's like just get your liquidity and just kind of deal with it. But you definitely see this with some larger private companies where they just do, like, I think SpaceX does like quarterly liquidity or every 6 months. It's just like a planned, like, you can sell whatever you need to sell. We do this event. So I think like that's something that's kind of evolved too. And then some of the business models, some of the private market funds also is like, we are on the cap table. We will give you some of our like access to our shares that we have. Like that's another model that's emerged.
Totally. Yeah. Listen, the market, I don't mean the stock market. I mean, just like the market changes quickly. Every year we write a consolidated company strategy, and you just can't overinvest in strategic clarity for yourself and for your team. And
you said you cannot overinvest?
You can't overinvest in it. It's one of my biggest learnings as a leader is that what may seem obvious to you just is not obvious in sort of all the minds of the company. And so you really want to emphasize strategic clarity. Actually, it's fascinating. In 2021, it was, we do an internal Stripe sat, and we ask about a bunch of different things. One of them was like, Stripe has a clear strategy. I think something like 50% of respondents agreed with that. We're now above 90%. And it's just a concerted investment in sort of, incanting the most important things, what you're focused on and why. This year, with these sort of, twin revolutions in stablecoins and AI, it's not that we've thrown the strategy out the window, but we have had to be very, very nimble in thinking about deploying, internal resources and some of our best people against new opportunities. And so being private, having the flexibility to think about doing that without like wondering about, any major like knee-jerk reactions that might happen from investors and activists and so on, I think is a luxury. And, again, it may be that at some point there is, a good reason to go public. But today we ask ourselves, why do it versus, why not?
There's also kind of, to your point about like activist investors, there's just like an annoying component is like, if you've got $2 billion or like your company is worth X amount and you can get a percentage of it and like make demands. And it's like, I think I had Aaron from Box on the podcast and he was like, they had to deal with some stuff where like people were trying to kick him out and force him to sell, and they got through it, but it was just like not what he wanted to do.
Yeah. And all these are tractable problems, and Aaron is amazing and he navigated that so well. But man, it probably wasn't the way he wanted to spend his time, and probably wasn't the highest and best for how he spent his time.
His hair's a little more grayer than it was if you like you age for sure.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, so back in college, you did this thing called Hack Yale. What was it?
Actually, I was in law school.
Or in law school, yeah.
I was in law school. It was this very fun sort of incidental mission where I was at Yale Law School. I was actually also working in the city as an engineer at the time. And, I had been an undergrad at Harvard and had seen this incredible culture.
What year was this? Like 2010-ish?
For undergrad?
Yeah.
I guess I graduated in 2007. So it was in the, early to mid 2000s.
Okay.
So this is the, the Facebook Meta, gestation era.
Did you have like a hot or not account? What was the original one called? Were you a member?
I honestly can't remember. I know there was Friendster, but that was separate.
Yep. But you were a member of the Facebook.
Remember the Facebook?
Back
Yes.
in, okay,
Yes,
back in the day.
yes. I was on the Facebook when it was Harvard only, right? And there's this incredible culture of like entrepreneurialism as an undergrad. And I was actually really struck when I got to law school that there just wasn't. And the curriculum for computer science was like sort of OpenGL and some like legacy technologies and learning about like how computers worked in a sort of backwards looking way versus just like, hey, how can you build things quickly? There wasn't really this builder mentality. And so Hack Yale was about how do we create this builder mentality on campus? And so I decided to just, I had all these undergrads coming to me, I guess through word of mouth saying, I have this idea, like, can you work with me on it? Can you build it with me?
Oh, because they knew you knew how to code.
Exactly.
Like, you were an engineer.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like that classic, I got an idea, like I just need to build it. Yeah.
And the answer was no, I can't. I have a lot to read for law school and I have a job. But maybe I can teach you. And so it started with, just a handful of kids the first week. And I was just thinking, okay, I'm going to teach like JavaScript end to end so that, you can think of server side and client side in a single language. This was early days of Node.js. And just I'm going to get people like, from 0 to 1, they can just start building their own, at least sort of demo apps.
Yep.
So I started with probably like 9 kids the first week or something like that. Second week, it was sort of standing room only, but in like a 30-person room. Third week, it was over 100. And just there was no fourth week. I shut it down and said, okay, let's see what this could be. So we just postered around campus that we're doing this and allowed students to apply. And in a week, a third of the Yale undergrad student body applied for the class, which was pretty amazing.
But this wasn't actually a class. Like it wasn't an official class.
No. In fact, the computer science department hated me for doing it. It was actually quite controversial.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And so I ended up working with some amazing people on it. Miles Grimshaw, who's an incredible partner at Thrive.
Yeah.
Was one of my TAs. Big Rose, who's, runs a great startup and was at Google before, was sort of a co-teacher with me. And so, we sort of turned it into a proper curriculum. I was all, pro bono. And it like lives on to today. And actually sort of went to multiple campuses. But it was really, really rewarding and fun, just sort of trying to sort of change culture on campus. And actually find as a leader, just culture is one of the hardest and most fun things to work on. I often find that companies have too many operating principles. And this was even true of us until recently, where it's like, here's the 15 things that we sort of, reward and think about prioritizing as a company. And, we've really distilled ours to just a handful. When I think about the people who are just the most successful at Stripe, they are the most user-focused. They are the most impatient and fast. They are most demanding of quality in what they do. So we say like be meticulous about your craft, focus on craft and beauty. They're the most humble, the most collaborative. And it's really, that handful of things that makes, people successful at Stripe. And so, just always thinking about culture. How are you modeling it? How are you messaging it? I think it's one of the most important things you can do as a leader.
And then around like this same time, I can't remember if you joined Thrive when you were at school or if you had graduated, but how did that come about? Because that was a pretty big move back in the time.
Yeah, I was still in school. Josh Kushner, who's Thrive's founder and runs Thrive, reached out to me cold. We didn't really know each other. And I was working as an engineer at one of his portfolio companies. At this point, Thrive was a really, really small fund. It was Josh and Jared, and a little bit of I think individuals' money. I don't know, actually. I think it was some of the General Catalyst partners were involved. And he reached out because he wanted a CTO for the fund. And so the idea is that I would join the fund as a CTO. And actually, I remember hacking together a CRM in the early days so we could track conversations and start thinking about tracking information about companies. And then it turned out what we really needed was just people to do deals. And so I started doing that and was fortunate and very excited to be on the journey from Thrive being about a $5 million fund to being a few billion by the time I left for Stripe about 5 years later.
And so I think Claire asked me to ask you this. You wrote a memo to do the investment. How is that memo played out? Like, I don't know if there's like significance of what was in this thing, but she wanted me to ask about it. How does that all kind of happen between?
Oh, I see. Like the investment memo at Thrive to message. Right?
Was there like a legendary memo that she's mentioning, or maybe she's just wondering like what did you think about Stripe at the time, what it could be, and like how it's evolved?
I always think that in B2B, you really want to focus on problem areas that have an enormous market size, like some degree of universality, like everybody needs the mousetrap you're building, and then a notion that people really care about the quality of the mousetrap. Like they want the best one. I sort of think of this as it's being core to the purchaser. Like they really will care about their choice. So an example of a company I invested in that is universal, but maybe not core, was a great company, a company that Stripe uses called Greenhouse for applicant tracking. Everyone needs an applicant tracking system, but there's a few on the market and people don't necessarily agonize over which one. Part of the reason I was so excited about Stripe was it's such a macro opportunity. You could just see the focus of the company, the mission of the company being to grow GDP.
That was the mission back at...
That was the mission back then, yes. To accelerate the pace of globalization. So quite inspiring. John and Patrick are very inspiring people.
Yeah, that's great marketing at the time.
Yes.
From like getting people excited to join, invest, et cetera.
Yes. Had the right customer base, right? You have, back in the day, and I'm not actually sure that people thought of the merchant acquirer they were choosing as being super core so much as just which one's the cheapest. And developers as customers really wanted the thing that could help them move the fastest. Growth was extraordinary. I felt a lot of, I had a ton of respect for John and Patrick and really liked working with them as an investor. And yeah, I think in terms of the question of like how it's played out, I don't think I projected Stripe out 10 years. It's been almost 10 years. I could go back and look. But last I checked, Stripe was ahead of my projections on volume and slightly below my projections on margin. And I don't mean OpEx margin, but just margin in terms of like gross margin.
Like the take rate, essentially?
Exactly. Yeah, the take rate net of network fees.
So Stripe did not turn into like a big corporate behemoth, like extracting value as fast as you thought they would. Like you're still like very much, you're giving a lot to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one belief I have that maybe is a bit contrarian is that it is great to be a low margin business. And that people over-index on margins. For example, public market investors will really care about like what your gross margin is. To a large extent, that depends on how you report your revenue. So a lot of payments companies report net revenue, and then off of that, their gross margin will look really high. They're pulling out all the payment systems costs. If you look at gross revenue, then they're a lot lower margin. The reason why I think being a low margin business is great is it just keeps you obsessively focused on customer needs. There's so much leverage in the next thing you can build for customers that they will, fervently, enthusiastically adopt because, the core of what you're selling them, is a low margin business. You build that additional service, you might be able to augment your margin by 20%, by 10%, so on.
But if you're already super profitable, the new thing might just not even move the needle, you're saying? Or it might actually decrease your margins or something like that.
Exactly. And so I think if you did some sort of, regression or PCA or something like that, you'd probably find that for the most part, companies that have lower margins, at least to begin, are the most customer obsessed. Amazon obviously being a great example.
Yeah. I think Amazon's an interesting example too, because there's such a long period of time where just the general consensus was Amazon is not profitable. So just like internet commerce isn't profitable.
Isn't going to work. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think there's like a crazy story with the way Walmart ran the business and like compensated people. Like as a store GM, you are compensated based on how your store performed. And so like if somebody a customer of your store were to like order something online, you'd you were incentivized for that to not happen because you get paid less. So like Walmart itself, because of this like almost like meme of like, oh, Amazon's not profitable, we don't need to worry about e-commerce. It's got to the point where it's like 2014, you're like, oh wow, we have never focused on this, and Amazon kind of beat us.
Yes.
And we'll never fully recover. Like we kind of lost our footing that we have. So I think it's an interesting way to like continue to operate with, under the surface maybe in a way too. Like people like don't fully pay attention. Because another example is like you just look at what you ask someone, what's the most interesting thing right now? And it's like AI. Mm-hmm. What's the fastest growing, most profitable thing? And it's like ChatGPT. All right, we need an AI strategy. Right. So everyone is like attracted to this light. Yes. And they like forget about, there's like a low margin, also really good business that no one cares about because AI is the thing.
Yes. Yeah, there was definitely a consensus in the early days that like Stripe wasn't a good business because margins were low. Actually, it wasn't a consensus, but there was definitely a cohort of people who sort of felt that strongly. And I think others who saw more potential. But, on the note of just how it keeps you focused on users, stablecoins are, I think, an incredible opportunity for our customers who have low margins. Because if you think about, marketplaces, maybe they take 3, 5, 10% off of the GMV that they're creating. If you're looking at then the payment method costs, be that cards or BNPLs or otherwise, or wallets, that can chew up 2/3 of the take on those payment methods.
Actually instantly like boost your profits 30, 50%.
Yeah. If you can create a high converting global payment method using stablecoins, that is really going to boost the margins of these companies.
So then how did you decide to join? Like you had been at Stripe, you were at Thrive, and you probably were pretty happy as an investor, I'm assuming. How did it kind of come about that you joined? You joined this one as CFO.
Yes,
like probably I would probably not have you pegged as like the top on paper choice of like a CFO of a company at the time.
Yeah, so I think I was an accidental VC and then sort of an accidental CFO in a way. I loved working at Thrive. Thrive is an amazing place, so I love the team. I don't think that being a venture capitalist was the thing I wanted to do when I grew up. I'm a technologist, want to have my hands in what we're building, be very close to it. One night, I got a text from Patrick saying, "Hey, do you want to come be CFO?"
That was it.
Yeah, that was it. And I think I replied. I probably have the text way back somewhere. That seems like a really bad idea. And Patrick, being very convincing, said something along the lines of, "Well, John and I think we could do it." And I was sort of like, "All right, challenge accepted." And I wasn't planning at the time to leave Thrive by any means. I think my sort of incumbent plan was, this is great. I'm going to do this for a while longer. I'm going to go start a company. I think that's always a journey that I had expected to be on. But it was Stripe. And, John and Patrick are just incredible people. I was really motivated by the mission. I thought the product was excellent. And then in terms of CFO, we talked earlier about going public. At the time, we were certainly nowhere near that. And so there was, I think, the ability to bring in a CFO without public market experience. And I think there were a lot of ways I could contribute as CFO. I'm not sure that I would have been the sort of best CFO to take the company public. And a few years in, I talked to Patrick, and just CFO wasn't really the journey that I wanted to be on. So today we have an incredible CFO in Stephen Tomlinson, who's worked at a lot of public companies. And I think he's a better profile for Stripe as CFO than I would have been.
Yeah, that's fair. And then how do you think you earned their trust? Like as somebody sort of from the outside, like, because obviously there was like a reason that he texted you this. It probably wasn't like, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" It's like probably made up his mind and was like, come do this. Like, what do you think was the reason that they trusted you?
That's a good question. We all believe strongly that just by far the most important input into hiring is back channels and references. I think people really over-index on the several times that you spend 30 minutes with a highly consequential hire.
And just like how well can you read them? And like you look in their eyes and like this guy's a killer or something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I tend to look at sustained performance at excellent companies as being a key indicator, and then back channels and references. So Patrick and I knew each other pretty well at that point. We'd known each other for a couple of years, and I think he had talked to a lot of people and felt like it was a good bet to make.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fair. And then Claire also mentioned you put a really high sort of priority on the strategic finance function.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I think I sort of know what that is, but some people might not really know what that means. So what is strategic finance and why was that such a big deal to do at the time?
Yeah, I think maybe the industry term for it would be, FP&A, but the part of FP&A that is closer to product development and go-to-market.
Okay.
There's sort of corporate, which is consolidation and closing the books and so on. And then there's the part of it sort of partnering deeply with the business and with product development teams. When I joined, I think we had 5 people on the finance team, and most of those were sort of on the accounting side. We didn't even have a treasury team. We had a small tax team. And we really just didn't have a good understanding of the business. And so in the early days, just wanted to get to having a baseline model for Stripe's trajectory and how we make money today and how we can expect to do so tomorrow. I remember like one of the early inflection points that doesn't sound like an inflection point, but it actually was in our thinking, was when we launched Radar. Radar is our fraud mitigation tool. It was the first time that we launched a product that was not payments. And again, this probably sounds incredibly obvious in retrospect, but the incumbent perspective to that point was Stripe would be the product. And it would be you buy Stripe and Stripe processes your payments and does a bunch of other things for you, and you're going to pay for Stripe. And this was the first unbundling of products. And I think that was guided significantly because of some of the early investigations we were doing and seeing that as our customers were getting larger, they wanted to see more unbundling of value. And they wanted to see, well, I'm paying this amount for payments. I'm getting competitive bids from others saying, we'll give you lower payments rates. But we knew our fraud product was really, really good. And so it's, okay, well, let's give you a better rate on the core payments, but let's also sell you fraud mitigation and sort of demonstrate that value as being sort of 2 dimensions as opposed to 1.
So it's an interesting kind of like evolution then. Like, so then how do you think about the go-to-market of the Stripe enterprise of products today? Like when you said you're seeing results on SDR, AI, outbound or whatever, like, do you like figure out a specific pain point you try to have like as the entry point, or is it always payments?
So it's not always payments. And I would say just, a big learning for me, and I think just something I would advocate to founders, CEOs, product leaders, is just get incredibly close to go-to-market and to sales. Because when you step back, sales is reality. It is that moment in front of the customer. Are they interested or not? Why are they interested? What can you learn from that? That is just so viscerally educating as to where you should be going as a company. And so today, I think we see a bunch of different entry points into companies. One is around core payments. You have for enterprise customers, in most cases, like a pretty significant payments infrastructure they built. And you might have more of a land and expand motion there, where it's like, okay, adopt Stripe for part of your payment stack, see how we perform. Auth rates tend to be a very key part of the calculus. Or, you want to add a payment method that you don't have today. You can use Stripe for that. The really interesting thing that we've been seeing on the core payment side is customers using what we call our optimized checkout suite, which is the hosted interfaces I referenced earlier. And there was this incumbent perspective that people would never outsource their checkout to Stripe or to any third party. And now we see that selling in the optimized checkout suite and saying, you can use any payments processor you want behind it, but it'll convert better and you'll have a better customer experience, has worked very well. But we see billing as being a huge sort of independent sale at Stripe. Connect, which is our infrastructure for marketplaces and platforms. Stablecoins, a really, really big one at this point, particularly for companies that have a very global footprint. Increasingly, Radar and fraud tooling as an independent sale. So we have we have our go-to-market machine sort of structured as a front line of a few hundred account executives, which is still very, very small, and then an overlay of specialized sellers, technical sellers for these individual product areas. And one of the really valuable learnings for me over the past couple of years is just how impactful it is to think about how you organize your sales team as almost a chipset. You have to design it really, really carefully. You ship it. You can't really change it that much for a year. And so being so intentional about how sellers are compensated, what you're pushing, what your sales plays are. Do you have hunters and growers, or is it all just one type of AE? Has been.
So hunter's like new customer. Grower is like, hey, here's some more stuff you should try that'll help you help you grow as a customer.
And just, here's how we're just making you successful even on your current product set.
Did you mess that up at some point? It sounds like maybe there's like some scar tissue around like how you designed, or
I would say less scar tissue and more just didn't pay enough attention to it.
So maybe you got lucky-ish that it kind of worked, or?
Well, we've been really underinvested in sales and marketing. Even today, sales and marketing together are under 10% of the company, which is like well below.
Under 10% of headcount or revenue, you're saying?
Of headcount.
Headcount, okay. Interesting. And so the one thing you mentioned, maybe an interesting topic, just semi-related, you mentioned like Stripe, we like the lower margin, is like, we're totally okay with it. Why are the margins low? Do you just have like a lower take rate than competitors, or like because that's probably another question that people like listening is like, come on, you got to ask this question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because you'll sometimes see in startup board decks, the margin bridge where there's this big chunk that just says Stripe, and it's like, I promise you, we are not taking 3% of your revenue. We would be a very differently shaped business if we were. The vast majority of that is going out to payment systems, and in particular to banks via interchange, to Visa, MasterCard, Amex for scheme fees. And so particularly in the enterprise, you have pricing that is sort of the underlying payments costs plus a small number of basis points on top of it. That's what Stripe takes. But then in that small number of basis points, you're paying your infrastructure costs, you're paying a bunch of variable costs related to serving customers and so on. So core enterprise payments is not a very high margin business.
Do you do anything differently than other people that like adds more value to customers that like ends up having lower margins? Like, is that a fair thing to say?
Well, I think we do a lot of things differently that adds value. I mean, I mentioned earlier reliability just being a critical one. And I do think that some of our infrastructural workloads are pretty fat in order to enable that.
So you spend more on your own infrastructure to have higher uptime.
Yeah. And I'd say both in terms of operating expenditures and in terms of just like core compute. Consistency promises in our API are pretty expensive, meaning that, the data is updated atomically in the API across a bunch of different services. For startups, we give away fraud protection for free. We think about this as being a core part of our value proposition, but also critical just to the overall ecosystem. Like you sort of have to buy fraud from Stripe at some level, because otherwise, just fraud rates in payments are going to be too high.
Yeah. And plus, if I'm like a fraudster and I'm thinking about who's the best company to go after, is it a big corporation or is it like a small startup that doesn't have capabilities? Yeah. Like they're probably my first target if I'm thinking through that.
Totally. Yeah. You see, fraudsters are infinitely creative. Card testing used to be a matter of taking a bunch of cards, choosing one merchant and attacking them, just running a ton of transactions through them via scripts. A couple years ago, we saw this new type of attack where card testers were using Stripe Checkout, which is the fully hosted payments page we offer. So it's actually hosted on stripe.com.
So they would make their own checkout page.
Actually, they wouldn't make their own checkout page, but they found a way to identify thousands and thousands and thousands of checkout pages.
Okay.
And then they would dribble their tests across all of these. So you'd see, a few transactions. They were using very generic names. I can't remember what they were, but it was like Jack Smith or something like that. And you would then see on Twitter these startups saying, I have this Jack Smith customer who's clearly fraudulent, like Stripe, what are you doing? And it was just very hard to detect these because only a few transactions on each. So actually pointing back to the foundation model, by sort of aggregating so much data into one big model and then sort of clustering in this like very high dimensional space, it's super easy to solve that today. But yeah, there's the fraudsters are very entrepreneurial and clever.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be. You got to evade. You got to not only evade the customers and the merchants, but like law enforcement.
Exactly.
You got to stay on top of a lot of stuff. Yes. One of the last questions, I feel like Stripe is pretty easy to use. Just like generally speaking, it's probably one of few financial services products where you can, maybe this has changed a little bit over time, but go to the website, sign up. I think you can just start using it right away, if I'm remembering right. Why do you think so many financial services products are just hard to use? Like you got to talk to a salesperson, you got to wait so long.
It's hard. One of our core strategic principles is to make our products and just Stripe generally instantly self-servable. It's what customers want. They don't want to wait. Some of them do. Some of them want to do a deep assessment, but startups in particular don't. They just want to get going as quickly as possible. And to the point of becoming conspicuously good at risk management, there's a whole lot you have to do to enable that. And so we are, as you're going through onboarding Stripe, we are underwriting you in the background. We're running a bunch of different models. We're deeply understanding your site. We're looking at our foundation model to see, is there anything that's sort of popping up there? And in a lot of customers, not the majority, I actually don't know what percentage offhand, but probably 20% or so are stepped up for review, meaning we'll do human review before you can move your first dollar. But even then, we can get you live within a day.
But you can still probably get the API, have Stripe in the product, but you can't use it yet. But you can get it. You can start using it, but you can't transact yet.
Yeah, majority of users can start moving money within minutes. Some percentage of users, it maybe takes a day. And then some percentage it takes longer because we need to do some back and forth.
Yeah. So this is just an element of you've built the risk management, fraud detection, using AI and LLMs to automate that stuff. So it's like when I first sign up, the first page of the application process, that's a couple of pages, I enter my company name and click enter. And then you're immediately, the spinning wheel that I might be seeing at the end of the application, you're like doing it throughout.
Yeah, a core dimension of product development at Stripe is finding a way to responsibly, as a steward of the ecosystem, bend like partner and regulatory space-time. Like this notion that partners will always insist upon this data, or the consensus is that you have to do these things. If you step back and say, what are people solving for? They tend to be solving for trust and safety, risk management on their side. And what we found as we really started investing in risk management was that it wasn't that others were really good at it. In many cases, they were like printed PDFs being reviewed in basements. They were just taking a much more conservative stance than we were in thinking about what it would require to be good at risk management. And so the idea was, you have to do this. And the fact of the matter was, with the right technology, you don't. So I actually feel like in most cases, we are better at managing risk than a lot of the partners that we work with. But we have taken a different route to get there.
Yeah. Last question, do you have a favorite CEO, founder, business that you just like learned from over time or gotten inspiration from over time? This could even be like, going back to like Roman Empire type, or like, more recently, just like any time throughout history.
There's a guy named Alan Mulally who was CEO of Boeing and then Ford. And I think his system and his operating model and his way of thinking has always been very inspiring to me. It is this focus on what he refers to as relentless implementation, but in the context of sort of egoless collaboration and clarity for like everyone on the team. I think what he did with Ford was incredible.
Because he can't like turn around during the financial crisis, if I remember.
Yeah,
okay.
I think he joined Ford in 2007 or something like that. And I think the share price bottomed out. I think you should look this up. It's somewhere around $2 a share. And I think when he left, order of $8 years later, it's something like $22 a share, something like that. So I think just an incredible operator and very inspiring people leader.
Yeah, well, this is a lot of fun. Anything you want to plug on your end? People follow you on the internet anywhere?
Best way to follow me is to follow everything we're doing at Stripe. There's a lot more coming. Just in the past month, we've launched the Agentic Commerce Protocol, instant checkout with ChatGPT, launched something called Open Issuance at Bridge, which is a platform to issue your own stablecoin. So, for example, Phantom, maybe the most beloved crypto wallet in the world, is launching Phantom Cash, which is their own stablecoin, open loop, can buy it in DeFi pools, built on top of Open Issuance. We've launched, as I mentioned earlier, Klarna in Link, a whole lot more. So, stay tuned to everything coming out of Stripe. Always eager for feedback. You can slide into my DMs or email me. I'm WG@Stripe. And thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. A quick thanks again to Numeral and Amplitude for supporting this episode. Head to numeral.com for the fastest, easiest way to stay compliant with US sales tax and global VAT. And to amplitude.com/AI-feedback to start listening to your customers at scale. If you missed it, make sure to check out last week's episode with Roger Ehrenberg on everything he learned returning multiple 10x funds to his investors and why he started a new fund to invest in sports, Game Changers Ventures. If you don't want to miss a future episode of the show, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, linked in the description to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.